Do you really want to do this? Are you sure you really want to do this?
It might be bad things. Don't do this. Maybe.
The DTMF now, you'd have to have a transmitter and receiver. Audio tone?
Your cell phone will make DTMF tones.
Okay, but it's got to listen to DTMF tones.
Well, I've got the decoder.
Yeah, but you got to connect the decoder up to something.
It's a microphone.
Oh, okay. So you're just going to be sending tones, raw tones, huh? Okay, that'll work. If you get that working, then I'll have to see how that's done.
In theory, it should be sending tones.
And see, all I want to do is when it decodes a particular tone, close an output. I'm done. I have invented the $135 phone answering system.
You should be able to have that little decoder, maybe sit there with a microphone or something, just sitting there listening, and then you just hit buttons and it drive around.
Yeah, that stuff is pretty well done. It doesn't not only respond to noise and that sort of stuff.
No, it should only respond to the tones.
But I suspect the signal's got to be pretty loud. You got to be. I suspect you're going to have to be within 3 or 4 feet.
Maybe.
I've got a voicemail. Oh well. See who from Idaho is after me.
Transfer them.
I could run the audio right out from the phone right to it, but then nobody would hear the tones. I don't know what will work better. I was going to play around with both ideas.
Well, what I would do is just, when it detects for the phone circuit, when it detects the button, it puts out a tone, which you can do with the Arduino itself, and then it connects the phone. It just, answering machine, if you answer it, it detects you picked up the phone, it will terminate the answering machine service and just connects you to the phone. It has to have a little 50 cents extra for that automatic detect that somebody picked up the phone. That's all I'd want is connect the phones. If it rings and finds it that it's real, it acts like it picks up the phone right then. Or it just tells you can pick up the phone. That's all we need. Just a tone to tell you can pick up the phone. That's it.
Where's Frank?
Number and beep loud.
There's Mr. Frank.
Well, just asking about you.
One of the very nice and very bad, or I guess one of the discreetly good or bad things about JavaScript is like the standard library is tiny, which means like very basic functions you expect to have come from the standard library of most of the programming languages do not come by default from JavaScript. So what ends up happening is that these end up coming from libraries, which is okay. It means like you can have like you can kind of make your own little standard library, but it's not consistent between users often. You can customize it to fit, but it gives you a lot of flexibility, but it can also be a hazard. Like, I don't know if you have a left pad business, where it's like, we had this little library, which was about like, I think it was less than 10 lines long, and its entire purpose was to left pad strings. It sounds stupid until you realize that JavaScript does not have a standard library function for this. And what happened was one of the more popular ones for that got taken off, and then bunch of people who didn't back up their dependency suddenly couldn't be built. It was like, oh, jeez. So yeah, be careful and keep backups of your dependencies.
I'm not going to eat candy today.
You're not gonna touch the candy?
No.
We had M&Ms, but I think they're pretty much dead.
They're pretty much dead. Okay, so I don't need to worry.
Yeah, you're
Last
safe.
time I think I ate 3 or something like that.
Candy's all down there.
There it is. All we got's the
Stuff
Snickers
like,
crunchy stuff.
And I actually didn't know that a lot of web devs didn't keep offline backups of their dependencies, and I always did so. And I realized it was weird. I felt kind of vindicated.
So now the JavaScript library comes with Windows and is distributed normally like it always was.
Not really. I mean, if you're talking about like Node, then basically Node runs on Node basically runs off a stripped down Chromium. It's basically Google V8 engine.
So if I go into Chrome, and there's JavaScript everywhere now, I assume.
Yep.
JavaScript's everywhere. So you at least need to have JavaScript loaded. It's loaded by default.
But if you install a Node, they pretty much have a little install of the
Node
engine,
is
so-
usually served from somewhere. You're gonna connect
Well, it's
to
usually
something.
server stuff.
Yeah.
You can also have desktop. Well, you can also have desktop applications in it. Like Electron basically runs on Node. It doesn't. Slack runs on Electron. Actually, quite a few apps now run on Electron. That's kind of neat.
Is this transparent to the normal user?
It basically, at that point, it's not really acting like JavaScript as in web. It's just pretty much acting like any other language. Like it just has its own little engine / interpreter that just comes with the program, and then you install that, which is pretty much just like any other thing you shove in there.
So it's like running software. You're loading a software engine to run an application. You're really running applications from the web.
Yeah.
Not really.
No.
If you think
It's not acting like JavaScript on the web, although it's the same language. It's just running off your machine. So it's pretty much running just like Ruby or Python.
They're downloading an interpreter to run locally on your system.
It's basically running the way kind of the way Java would run.
if you this
Anything
is
else like
Okay.
that.
the game I talked to you guys about last time. What is it? Agar. I call it the game with
Visual
circles,
Studio
the
Code
cubes
is
like
done in Electron.
And what
That's
they do is
interesting.
they load it on a server and release an HTML page, which is the first one. And then you start that HTML page, and then you query the server and you load JavaScript from the server, and then it runs on the client. But most of it is done on the client. I mean, the client, not the client, but the server is really everything. Because
Okay.
everybody's not going to have just the right versions of JavaScript.
Or exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what they're doing now.
Well, those are
They
really
do all
matter
kinds of
because,
things,
like-
but that's kind of an example.
Doesn't really matter too much because if you package up if you're doing a desktop application, if you package up a desktop application, typically your install is going to come with the engine component for your platform. So it's kind of isolated that way, so the users don't have to worry about it.
But that's kind of more complex than just running it on the server and you're just a web browser talking to it.
I guess
Something
technically
sure.
it is.
Gotcha.
In practice,
But you
it's automatic.
Looks
like you
It's
connect.
pretty much.
Like the differences between Windows 10 and Windows 7 and XP and whatever else is out there.
But it's pretty much the same way. Like, in any case, it's easier to do than a lot of things because.
And then you got some knucklehead connecting with the Chromebook. You have to handle that. That may be, I don't know how difficult that would be.
It shouldn't really matter too much.
Shouldn't matter.
Because typically, if it's like if it's a web application, you're accessing it via a browser, which is going to be the same across the platforms, unless the people who made the browser mucked up and they did, they usually take E for that. But like if it's a desktop application, you're gonna have to compile the engine for like whatever platform it's gonna be installed on, which honestly isn't any different from any other language being used to write any other desktop application. But yeah.
I need to temporarily make my
Which I tend to like to do
default
anyway. Like
Chrome.
like packaging
Just do
Python applications
Chromecast,
for
right?
desktop use is like,
Yeah, you
you know,
need to.
you know what? I'm not even
Well, you
gonna
don't need
expect
to
to
make
have
it
it
the
installed.
default.
I'm just gonna take
The
the
reason I
script
need
on
to do it is
Python
'cause
install,
the
shove it
PowerPoint-
in there,
Well,
and
just
then pack
click
it
on
up.
that.
It's like screw it.
Yeah.
Deal with it.
That's the way to do it. That's where you have to do it. You know,
The Chrome-
Which has
the
pros and
casting.
cons.
No, but what's going to happen is I want to trigger something from PowerPoint.
That's-
Otherwise, you gotta do the
It's
Java
gonna bring
thing
up
where
internet
it's like,
explorer.
you have the right version
Well,
of
if you're-
Java installed.
Oh yeah.
Did
If
you
you're
forget
casting the
that?
entire screen, it won't matter.
Screw
So you just need to start casting the whole screen.
So the Java dependencies
Click
are
on the little arrow thing
still
here.
here. Are people not using Java as
And
much?
I don't.
Or
They're still there. They
Probably-
just got a lot more transparent. If you're using-
Yeah.
They update automatically, and you don't
Yeah.
even know.
It's not as painful as it used to be.
Mm.
Like you probably have,
So it's
you're
casting.
probably running a few Java. I know, like
We probably need to
I've got quite a
get.
few applications
probably
that
need
are
to
running
stop
that run on
casting
Java
and get-
there, but it's not really.
But
Wait till you finish.
I think.
Did I do that?
I think you did that. So.
Like the only hiccup I run into occasionally.
So you need to
is
the
open
start casting
JDK
again
versus Oracle's
when you're ready.
Java.
Do I now?
I think the only real hiccup I get with Java as a dependency nowadays is Oracle's Java versus the OpenJDK version of Java, which they're almost like 99% the same. But if you're doing development, then sometimes you need to install the Oracle version and not the OpenJDK versions.
Now the Java is, when you see Java on a Windows system, it's going to be what version of Java are you going to see?
But
Pretty
there's
much the latest one at this point.
Is it Oracle or is it?
It's going to be Oracle's version,
Okay.
usually.
It's the new day on the world.
probably. It's probably Oracle's.
Most likely. Because actually every now and then you have to get a new version of Oracle.
If your Windows is going to be Oracle, does Mac use Oracle's? I think Mac uses Oracle's. If you're on Linux, it'll start out with the OpenJDK version, but then you have the optional switch, which isn't that hard anymore. You have PCA.
Yeah.
Done, but-
Linux. I've still got Ice-T installed on mine for that stuff. So Linux is a little different.
Really, it doesn't matter at this point because like the differences are so minor. It's like I think the only time you need to worry about it is if you actually deving something.
It's the only time I ever have to worry about what's actually installed.
Like I have the Oracle one. I only had to install the Oracle one for doing Android dev as well as I think that's about it.
And see, I think Android Studio complained about the version of that I had installed, and then it worked anyway.
It'll work anyway.
And then it worked anyway.
I mean, it'll 99% work anyway. You're probably not gonna notice it, but I just install it just to get to shut up.
I'm pretty sure it complained, and then it worked anyway. But who cares?
I mean,
Yeah,
there's not much difference other than the licensing.
With JavaScript, I don't do anything that's just very minimal, very standard, just nothing fancy. And most of the time it's from the web anyway, so
You get,
I don't know how I got,
you didn't roll your own auth, did you?
I turned it off.
I think you turned it off, so you won't have to go back in
Oh,
there.
okay, well, that's fine. I want to wait till we got ready.
Okay. Let's see. Leroy's
document your
version.
dependencies.
Leroy,
You're gonna have
did you have
lots.
anything you want to do today?
Nope.
Okay.
No, I was waiting for Frank and Jeremy. They both said they had stuff to do today.
Okay, Frank's next on the list.
All right, let's see if I can get the Chromecast running.
That picture that Chromecast had up there of the stars, when we went to Hawaii, we went to Haleakala crater, and they have telescopes up there. It's beautiful. You can just see the stars. It's memorable.
So do I need to just click this one?
Click.
Okay, that's slightly less bad.
You need to click on that,
All right.
and then
Okay.
yeah, so that's weird. Click on cast screen.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
then click Chromecast.
Then click Chromecast. Yeah.
And
Then click that one,
then, okay,
and then it should start casting.
it's working on it.
At least that's the theory.
It's working on it. I don't know why it's taking so long.
Something definitely happened when it freaked out and it reset the. I may have to go over and reset the Chromecast.
Try to stop casting and start it again. If you can get it back up and do stop casting, and you might be able to restart it. Sometimes you have to tell it to stop, and it'll feel better.
Yeah, he doesn't have the option to tell it to stop.
Didn't make it that far, did we? Did you connect to the router?
I'm connected to the router.
Okay.
Act 1. Yeah, connected. Okay. Failure capture media. Unable to capture the media contents. Please try again.
0.007 gigabytes of data.
No. Okay.
Leroy, did you have?
Oh! I see what it's doing. It's asking you share your screen.
Oh. Okay. There.
Or no, you want the entire screen, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you got to
Sure.
click share screen at the
Okay.
end. It's an extra step.
One extra thing. What do we know? We don't know what we're doing. There you go. You're good now.
All right.
And remember, look at your laptop, not at the TV, because there is definitely a delay. And why did it go back and act like it did?
You want to click somewhere else on the screen.
Maybe you can't go full screen. Maybe you can't go full screen with them.
It worked last time. I had a PowerPoint.
One more time, just for giggles. Getting closer every time. Can't do this like that. We got this whipped.
Okay. So suppose I stop this, go back to Chromecast.
Yeah, see, it says.
It's a failure. It says it's failure to capture.
Let me go reset the Chromecast just for the sake of.
Something happened.
Chromecast is booting, so give it a second. Just for the sake of argument, just because it acted hokey. So. And sometimes hokey means reset.
Okay. So you think it's up?
It should be up now.
All right. Chromecast. And there's the screen.
Now you're just click stop casting.
Okay.
Do it again because you weren't casting the entire screen.
Okay.
So click the little down arrow.
Down arrow.
Cast
Screen.
Screen, yeah.
And then Chromecast.
Correct. And then
entire screen.
And then
and
share. And then hopefully this actually works this time. Don't minimize it.
All right.
Just leave it.
I'll just switch to PowerPoint.
Yeah, just switch to PowerPoint.
Okay. All right. So,
And hopefully,
I guess I missed part of Jeremy's talk, but we were talking.
Oh, we haven't started yet.
Oh, you haven't started?
He's after you.
I was okay. I was
You want him to go first?
Might be best.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna do mostly demo kind of stuff. I'm gonna say some words, but not as many.
Jeremy, you ready?
Okay.
After we did all that to get you up and running.
You got to set up your Chromecast, Jeremy?
Hang on a second. It should be pretty straightforward. Oh, jeez.
So,
One moment.
if he's going,
I need to stop sharing.
are you going to cast up onto the screen?
I'm gonna cast.
Click on stop. All right. That'll just make life so much simpler if we stop before we try to take over. I think there's a glitch in the matrix somewhere when.
There's a glitch.
There's a glitch in the matrix.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's getting deep now.
When somebody just tries to take over, I think it glitches it out. I think it just doesn't like it.
My Roku TV hacked it up, and I'm having to have it replaced because it lost broadcast, basically.
Hang on, wait a second.
You're casting the wrong tab.
Yep.
It's the one on the pull down on the far right. It's up there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Cast screen window.
And then, do that again. Okay. And then you got to do this one.
Entire screen, yes. Share my entire screen.
Okay.
Because things happen.
Be telling Jeremy what to do. It's fun. It's entertaining at best.
Jeremy knows stuff, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is not really about making, I'm going to assume you can already make websites. I assume you can already figure server. This is basically just a collection of stuff that's easy to forget to do, or things you probably know how to do. That's easy to forget, because, unfortunately, web dev is not hard because it's hard. It's hard because you have, a giant list of crap that you need to remember to do. That's very easy to forget. It was in no particular order. Okay, so let's see, what can we start with? CSS grids, they exist. Basically, if you need basically don't use tables. I mean, even if you're not using a framework, you can have like CSS grids that are standalone. If you don't know what you're doing, please get one, because it helps you with making. There's any number of them out there, and it helps you with making layouts that adapt to your
Okay, what is a grid?
So basically, it is it's a bunch of CSS with a bunch of class names that help you. Well,
you want to position stuff on the screen.
Make layouts that are, so as an example, here's my boring ass template site. And give me a moment, I gotta find my little thing. So if I go to, say for example, home, and then I'll show you the HTML here. Like right now, for this site I have Bootstrap on, and then you have little classes, a collection of classes which are set to, it's like a 12 wide, it's based on a 12 wide grid. So it acts like you have 12 units of width of columns, and then you do column medium 4, and then you have a class for a row, and then if we run this thing, and you have a row, and then
if you use Visual Studio, you can generate this thing pretty much automatically.
And if you go any, so you can have that as either as part of a framework or by itself. It's just a CSS file, import it, use the classes, that works. If you don't have an alternative system to make a layout, then it helps a lot. Because it's kind of like tables, but without the suck.
And if you try to manipulate those things, You need to know a lot, and it takes time. I'm just saying.
And this sort of goes along with that, is that if you don't have a specific plan for a style in mind, then you probably want a CSS framework, just because you don't want to do worse than basic. I mean, there is the argument that like a lot of sites look the same because they use Bootstrap or Foundation, but if you're going to have your own design, don't do worse than Bootstrap or Foundation. You should probably consider that the baseline of where you should be. If you're going to have your own style, then make sure it's better than that, or better for your usage than that. So there's Bootstrap, everyone uses that. There's also Foundation. They do pretty much the same thing. They have a bunch of widgets already made, nav bars, grid systems already built in, things like that. And that takes care of a lot of your basic layout and styling bits. Let's see, JavaScript. Okay, so JavaScript. For some reason, some people, especially if you haven't web dev in a while, have issues with this where they stick all their JavaScript into a little thing at the bottom of their page or something. This doesn't really work too well because then you can't debug it with, say, Chrome DevTools. So for each of my pages, I tend to have like if I need JavaScript for that page, I'll import a JavaScript file that's separate from that. That way, when I go to that way, you can actually debug it, and it doesn't clutter up your HTML like crazy. By the way, Chrome DevTools exist. I know that sounds silly. A lot of this stuff is going to be very basic stuff, but like there are better ways to debug JavaScript than trial and error.
But trial and error is so much fun.
And again, it's one of those things
And you
that's
learn a
like,
lot.
if you do web dev on a regular basis, you already know this, but a lot of people who like only do it like every once in a blue moon just kind of forget it exists. Like, hey, breakpoints.
Oh yeah.
We have a debugger. Yay! We can look at values and figure out what the heck's going on. Isn't that great? So yeah, those two go hand in hand. Like keep your, but if it's in your HTML file, most of the time your browser dev tools won't be able to debug it. It'll just go through and you'll have to trial and error it. I think the only time I ever write JavaScript straight right into the page is if as a cheap way to bring values over from templating system. I think that's the only reason I would do it. There are probably better ways to do that. What else? Again, these are in no particular order. CDNs. Yeah, so a lot of libraries already have are on content delivery somewhere. So I'll show you one real quick. If you can't tell, this is Django. If it wasn't already obvious. So you can often get your JavaScript libraries from like a service that's already out there. And the reason you do that is that if you are using a version of a library from a CDN that a lot of your users are using, they'll already have that cache. So that doesn't add to your page load time. On the other hand, it also means that CDN is not available, it doesn't show up properly. So oftentimes when I draw something from a CDN, I tend to have a fallback. So you see here, I kind of have this a little bit of in the script of the page that just checks if the jQuery exists. If the CDN is not running, then go ahead and fall back to a local copy I include as part of the site. But it only does that if the CDN is not there. So for most of the users, that library is not going to add to the load time. So that's a good thing to do. And have a fallback if practical. So front-end JavaScript frameworks. So at some point, you may reach a point where you are writing a ridiculous amount of JavaScript and having to roll your own to do a lot of stuff. If you're writing a basic page, you're not going to have to worry about this. But if you find that like half of your code is ending up being like plain JavaScript or like jQuery or something, then it might be time to adopt some sort of framework like let's say Angular or React, which are basically they're like web frameworks, but they're entirely client side. So that will give you sort of a structure. It will give you sort of they give you a large library of tools you can do to do certain logic. Basically, if you're running a lot of logic client side and your code just starts getting, you probably want a sort of structured environment to do that in at some point when it starts building up to a certain point. Like some examples include React, you've got Angular, you've got Ember, you've got, there seems to be a new one coming out every week. Pick one. There's also Vue.js, which I kind of like because it's almost kind of like React, but it's a little it's even lighter. So yay! And so you get little expressions to do simple things like, hey, demo data. Okay. So yeah, that's a way to do that. So that's what. So you might want to bring that in if your front end is becoming a major part of your application. Obviously, basic pages don't have to worry about it. That's when it's usually something you do when your thing gets really big and you're trying to build Gmail or something, or getting there. So this is also another point. What not to do client side. Am I going a bit faster? I'm trying to get through everything. That makes sense. So what not to do client side. So this really depends on your dev environment, but now, it doesn't do this as much anymore, but I remember when I used to do like stuff using Windows stacks, like it would often sort of obfuscate what was client side or server side. But I do feel that it's important to know what code is running on your server and what code is being sent to the client, because in general you don't want to send things to the client you don't want the client to see, because it's running on the client, which can be a problem. Like if you have, like obviously, for in a lot of cases it's easy. Your JavaScript is going to be running on your JavaScript is going to be running on your client side, and your and whatever language you use on server side is going to be running on your server side. But basic gist is that send as little sensitive information as possible to the front end. You don't want to suddenly have to send the stuff up there in order to verify it. And basically assume all code and data you put in the client on the client side is visible to the user, because it is. All you got to do is open up the browser dev tools and you see everything there, and you can check all the values. Don't put someone's, like, basically if you don't want them to see it, don't send it up. And that sort of covers the client side. Let's say that's sort of an extension of this. Don't trust the client side. You will end up doing, sometimes you will end up doing things twice. So I guess just as a quick example, up here for like a contact form, I brought in a little library called Parsley, which is nice for like for like doing validation client side. That way, if this thing is running, then like let's not put in anything that. It already validates for the user's convenience, like, hey, that's not a valid email. And things like that. So as an example, for validation, you might want to do validation client side, just for users' convenience. But you don't want to trust that going back. So obviously, when it gets back to the server side and you actually get the stuff out of your post, you still want to verify it. You still want to make sure it's valid. Apply all your constraints. do anything you need, like do all those checks again, because your client side might be broken, or your client side might be sabotaged. Like basically, the way you think of client side is like you took a set of instructions here, follow them. It's entirely on the user side's hands what happens there. So as you see, I kind of do the validation again when it gets back, because I don't trust the client side to be correct.
You don't trust the computer? If it works, or it seems to work, I'm good.
So yeah, basically assume anything can happen to anything happens client side when it comes back to the server side. Recognize when that happens and do any checks you need to do that you need to make sure that you're getting the right data.
That makes sense, actually.
It makes all kinds of sense. I just don't do it.
It makes sense.
You should do it. It's a problem. Okay, here's something that I sometimes forget.
Extra effort.
Cache busting. Okay, this is something that a lot of people overlook. So have you ever done this thing where you wrote up a page and then you had a JavaScript file, you had some CSS, and you had an image or something, and you made a change to your image, your JavaScript CSS, and it didn't show up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So and then you refresh a few times, and it did show up, and you forgot it ever happened. Is your user going to refresh a few times to make sure it works? No.
They'll call up, and then I'll say, refresh the browser.
Yeah, that's not good. So basically what happens is if you're pulling in any files outside of the main HTML page, like it's shut up first, the browser is going to cache those files. And if you make changes to those files, oftentimes it's not going to reload them again. And so it'll end up running old versions of those files, which may not be compatible with the changes you just put up. So the way you defeat this, there's a couple ways to defeat this. One is to basically, well, actually, all of them pretty much come down to this. You gotta change the link, essentially, somehow, so that the browser knows that something has changed. Like, if you do, for example, well, you're not going to see it here, but like, let's say you have a link to like a little CSS file or something, or let's say some JS. As long as that remains the same, the browser is just going to assume nothing's changed. So here's what you do: you can either change your file name every time you update, which is a pain in the ass. It's 2 now. Reload. And if you just have a basic page, with that's only maybe 1 or 2 pages, and you're just linking JavaScript for it to run, that might be acceptable. Like every time you change it, append the date to it or something, or append a version number to it.
So there's no way to force a reload.
There's no way to force a reload reliably. There are some ways that sometimes work. Like if you don't want to change, you have to change the file name and then change the link. Or you can sometimes get away with adding a query string, like a question mark thing, and that will load up the same file. And since it's just a static file, it's not going to do anything, but it will change enough for it to reload. Sometimes, not always. I used to do that.
Control Alt F5.
Sometimes, but not always. So it's like, it's not going to guarantee. The only way to guarantee to reload is to change the name. Now, if you have a larger site, obviously renaming it is impractical. So you're going to, if you have a larger site, you're going to want to have an automated way to do this. Now, a lot of web frameworks pretty much provide this. If you're doing Rails, if you're doing Django, if you're doing like Node, well, Node doesn't do it by default, obviously, but Node has some libraries that do this, as well as build process. Actually, Node tends to do this a different way. It tends to do that in build process, where like when you build, it actually appends like hashes or versions to all the files automatically, and then when it goes up to serve. But if you have a large site, you're going to want an automated way to do that.
If you do it with .NET, it's going to it's going to do a rebuild. I mean, it's going to
Yeah.
build page.
So it
rebuild
tends
the
to be either
application.
like it tends to be either as a part of deploying statics or it's going to be a part of build. Like if you do Rails or Django, then it's like when you run the command to do the statics, if you have some option turned on, it'll append a hash to it. So that is different every time it changes.
Because I never do that. I do have problems where people call up and whine.
Yeah.
Reboot the computer.
Anyway, take care of that.
Save effort for me.
Yeah. There's lots of ways to do that. Just automate it. It's a pain in the ass. Find a way to automate it if your framework doesn't provide it. So, again, make life easier. Your users are not going to go back to you. They're just going to say, this is broken, I'm gone. Prevent SQL injection.
That's a good one. You should do
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah, basically, the gist of this is that if you're making database queries and you're taking input from the user and adding it to a string and running that as a query, you're doing it wrong. Because SQL injection is, well, there's a more complicated way, more thorough way to explain it, but the short version is that putting in SQL into your fields and then it gets into your database because you just added it to a string.
Plus, people can guess if they crash it, they can gradually guess how to get into your database.
Yeah, drop table, or things like that. So you're either going to want to either use whatever your data access provides you with as far as sanitizing your queries. A lot of libraries will have you if you're doing like a raw database query, you'll have it's like, okay, put in your query but with like little placeholders in it, and then pass in all the parameters separately. If you ever wondered why that was, that's why that is. Because
.NET gives you a web.config file. Plus,
Yeah.
you can set it up so that if it crashes, that stuff doesn't get displayed to the client.
Yeah.
Some goofy message gets displayed.
So I've seen that happen a lot because like a lot of people when they first start out, it's like we're doing a database query, and it's like, well, why do all the examples have me like putting in these like little format holders and then passing all the parameters in separately, and then they don't do it because then that seems more complicated. The reason you do that is so that it'll check it can sanitize it for any SQL that's sneaking its way through, so that someone can't destroy your tables from your form, which is disastrous. Either that, or if your framework, if you're using an ORM, like if you're doing Rails or Django, if you're doing Windows stuff, you'll be using like Entity, just any sort of thing that'll take care of it as well. In general, it's something that you should have taken care of in some way. Okay, another security thing. CSRF. Who knows what that is? Please tell me to do it.
Be sure to use tokens for AJAX. I know what AJAX is, but what's CSRF?
So CSRF. So CSRF. Well, what that is? Well, let's go find a definition. CSRF is basically an exploit where, cross-site request forgery. So there is a sort of in-depth explanation for what that is, but basically what happens is that, let's say you have a form, and you need to authenticate in order to use it. What the server is looking for is that it's looking for a certain URL endpoint, and someone doing a post request, sending a post with the form and the data to that point, and then it does whatever that form does. Simple, right? Here's the thing. So let's say you're a malicious person, and let's say you know that the user's probably logged into your site. They got their authentication cookie or whatever, and they're logged in, so they're already off. What if you send them to your site and you make a page and you make a link, and when they click that link, it uses their auth token or whatever, sends a form that's already filled out to that endpoint.
That means that somebody is extremely devious and
yeah, and this is actually quite common.
Just count on people like that not existing when you don't have anything important on the site.
So that's basically the gist of it. There are other variations of this type of attack, but that's sort of the basic gist of it. So what do you do about this? Well, one way to do this, and again, a lot of frameworks will have, a lot of like server-side frameworks will have ways to automate this, is to have a CSRF token. So what happens that in addition to your authentication, let's say that in addition to your authentication, you put something in, you generate sort of a hard to guess token. That's a bunch of, you know what that is. It's like a long string. And then, can I see what it is here? If I open it up and, I don't know if it's visible here. I'm going to see if I can make it visible. You know what? Now I got to find it. It's here somewhere. Ah, there we go. So this is one example. They don't always look like this, but this is sort of Django token for doing this. But so it has, so in this case, it has hidden in the form a sort of like little invisible hidden value that's like this thing, and this gets generated per session. So when you log in, you get like a token for that session. And so that makes it harder to do that because when the post gets sent server side, the server side is supposed to check if that token is right. So in order to do a CSRF attack, the malicious guy would have to somehow get that token, which gets generated per session. So that's one of the ways you can prevent that attack. And again, that's something you don't want to roll your own because that's something you obviously want to automate, like hey, generate a token, when it comes back, check for it. And a lot of frameworks will do this. If you're doing your own, there's also standalone libraries that'll do this, but it's one of those things that know that this is a thing and make sure you're taking care of it somehow. Also, one thing that sometimes gets forgotten, since a lot of libraries and ready-made solutions are supposed to work with static HTML forms. If you're doing sort of an AJAX submission where it's dynamic, make sure that's being protected as well, because it's still a form going to an endpoint. So, I mean, just as a silly example, I've got a little bit of JavaScript that I got from someone else who was cleverer than I was. That I call alert protection. That basically
this is scary.
It goes ahead and gets the token like Django.
Jeremy is very careful. Probably most people, I know I'm not that careful.
So basically, for my AJAX stuff, I have this thing that gets the token, inserts it into the post that goes back to the server, and then it checks for that. That way, the AJAX stuff is protected as well. So that's good to have because that can screw you over.
Back when we wrote code and doing, as we did some SQL calls, they're really rudimentary. It was the calls were in Fortran and it's compiled, and the user had no chance of getting to anything. I mean, he just had a display. It was a dumb display. He couldn't do anything.
You weren't displaying it on the web.
No.
Okay.
It was
It's a big difference.
It was graphical in nature, and if you did a table, the table was at the server, and the guy had no chance of getting to your table. Zero. No chance of doing an SQL call. No chance.
Technically, SQL injection, it's not as common because of the way most desktop applications are sort of local only, so it kind of doesn't matter most of the time because the user's screwing themselves over. But if it goes out to somewhere else, it can exist for desktop applications. It's not as common, just because like it's easier to avoid in that space. But it is a thing. So basically, in general, sanitize your database according
There
to
would
your
have to be
user
a
input.
thought that you have something important in that database.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Which I don't have anything.
Is it still, like, I know that was a big thing a while ago. Is it still like a
as long as
huge,
people forget to.
yeah,
If somebody wants to hack you, that's a good way in.
yeah. So
Church
there's
sites do it.
it's still there. Okay. Never mind. Silly
Yeah.
question.
Now you need to want to have some energy.
I mean, that was a big deal
to
back.
actually do that.
Like, back in the day, that was like nobody was doing any of this, so it was super simple to do that. It was
Okay, so databases. So a few things regarding databases. Obviously, if you have a site and you're processing data, you can have a database. It might be MySQL, it might be Postgres, it might be SQL Server, whatever. So this is neutral. Anyway, so database connections. A lot of setups you're going to have your database on a separate server. Maybe you won't, but sometimes have it. But if you have your database on a separate server, encrypt your database connection. For some reason, I've seen it very common where, and to be fair, attacks against this are kind of not common, so I guess it's easy to forget, is that database connections are network connections. For some reason, people forget that. And so they can be subject to attack, even if it's in your network. Even if it's in your network, defense in depth. Protect even if they get into your network.
If you get that password, the game is over.
You don't want.
It
You don't
takes
want
30
shit to be over
seconds to
because
wipe it
they're-
out, encrypt it, or copy it. whatever.
Yeah. So basically, if you've got a database connection, and a lot of existing frameworks will provide ways to do this. People don't always look them up, and they don't use it. But you can either have an SSL connection to your database, or you can set up an SSH tunnel. Maybe you might want a VPN to your database if it's. I mean, that's not very efficient, but you can do it if you want to. But like, if it's on a separate server and it's passing over a network, encrypt your connection to your database. That's a good idea to do.
Suppose you just don't allow remote access to your database.
I pretty much, call me crazy, I pretty much assume that you might be able to get remote access.
If,
I got bulkheads all the
even
way
if it's
back.
blocked.
Yeah. I don't consider again, a defense in depth is a good thing. Basically, if you have someone getting past a certain layer of protection, you don't want to be screwed just because of that. I like having bulkheads all the way back. Anyway, so database migrations. So this becomes more of a thing with larger projects if you have a store or something, but there is sort of the fact that database does not live on the same time scale or does not go through the same life cycle as your code. Like, code can change back and forth whatever because it's logic. Data is data, which means it only likes going forward. It doesn't like going back, or it causes problems. So if you're handling a significant amount of data, and if you have a web application that handles a lot of like transactions and whatnot, you want to have some way to handle database migrations. Now, a lot of web frameworks will have ways of doing that, and there's standalone stuff like Liquidbase, which does that. And basically what happens whenever you deploy code from your development environment to your actual server, what generally happens is that you also set up a script to migrate the changes over. So basically, move the production database forward to the point where it matches dev. So like, let's say you take a column and then you rename it something and move it somewhere else. If you just take like the SQL commands to do that and set it in production, you'll lose data because that column will disappear. And so like in order to add a column or something and then transfer data over to it, you'd write a script that adds that column and then copies all the data from the previous column to the new column and then deletes the old column, and then basically it moves forward like that in a complete way. That way when you deploy to production, your data gets changed accordingly. Now, a lot of people don't do that because it is more involved than simply just writing SQL and then slapping it on
Yeah, I
there.
guess it depends on how often you do that.
Yeah,
It's like
I mean,
structure the database.
so it is one,
It should change a lot during the
something
year.
you wanna automate to an extent. So there are things like Liquidbase where basically you write a bunch of scripts that do that and it puts that in source control. That way your thing moves along as you deploy the code. Or you might be writing like a lot of ORMs have ways of doing that. So basically, just again, this is sort of platform agnostic. Have a way to take care of that if you're handling a lot of data, because it's a lot easy. If you have something in place to do that, it makes it a lot easier than like having to, when you do a making changes to your production site and suddenly losing data and having to roll back, or having to reconstruct the steps you did to make the new database to preserve your data. That is terrible. So have a way to take care of that. Also, enforce constraints in the database. I guess that's sort of a common sense thing, but if you have a string of a certain length and you validate it on the client side, you validate it on the server side, and you should also have that constraint back in the database, your MySQL, Postgres, or SQL Server, or whatever you've got. Again, just to be thorough. Again, there are automated ways of doing that, like a lot of web frameworks will have in their ORMs or whatever they use to access data will have ways of just adding those to the database automatically, but have some way to take care of that. Or do it manually. If your project's small enough, you can get away with it. And also, again, this is more of a database thing, a site thing, but the old saying, normalize until it hurts, denormalize until it works. Basically, database normalization is good. You still want to do it. It prevents bugs.
Especially if you have somebody else to do it.
I do my own, man. So basically, make sure you don't have redundant data in separate places where they might go out of sync and cause bugs in the application. Make sure you enforce your constraints so you don't have orphan records that basically aren't accessible anymore after you delete something. It's just sort of due diligence to make sure your data doesn't become a complete mess. And then, obviously, since normalization makes things less efficient, then after you've normalized, then you kind of denormalize until you get the performance you want. Then you'll reach the spot where you should be at. Again, I'm not going to go through how database normalization works, but something anyone who writes applications that handle a lot of data should know. Handle user uploads and data separately from code. So this is something, again, this is sort of common sense, but sometimes you forget to do. So, and your setup's going to want to have this anyway. So if you have things that users upload, like let's say images, files, or anything like that, you want that separate. Don't let that go into something that then goes, I mean, obviously it shouldn't go into source control, and obviously, like, you don't want it in your code, essentially. You want to know where it's going. So again, if you're working with any established framework, it's going to have that, but if you're rolling your own, just make sure you have a separate directory that has, okay, here's where all the user uploads go. Okay. Don't let anything execute out of here.
It just needs to have a separate spot because it's going to use code to actually do it.
Yeah, and basically, when you do that, simply, they're guilty until they're proven innocent. So basically, don't let anything, like if you're running on a Linux server, don't have execute permissions in that folder.
Right.
You don't want anything going to your server and suddenly executing. That's
bad. Early days, like back in the BBS days, there was a BBS that was written poorly, and when you uploaded a file, it actually got uploaded into the working directory. So somebody who knew what they were doing
could go and run it.
Well, they could upload a executable that was in the directory and replace it, and it would be executing their mischievous code.
It's like a virus.
So the fix was make it go to a completely separate directory and verify the name.
Yeah, so basically,
Don't
only
allow any executables in that folder.
Right.
make sure you know what types of files can come in, and make sure they can't execute once they get in there. Make sure your permissions are set up
Plus,
right.
you can actually check as they're uploading. You can check the
Yeah.
file types and allow.
Also, and this is sort of a weird thing, especially, again, this is sort of from a Linux server perspective, because I usually run Linux servers, but if you're running a Linux server, you're going to want a virus scanner that scans that directory. It might not, because the thing is, stuff in there might not affect your server, they might affect other users when they come back. So you can be a carrier, but not have symptoms, essentially. So protect your users, especially if you know these files are going to go back to your users in some way. So check them.
That's what to do. Back in the day, back when I ran BBS, we ran antivirus. Every time an upload got uploaded, it would run an antivirus scan on that file.
Okay.
For that very reason.
So, another thing. And sorry about the organizations list. I kind of typed this up really fast as I was going. So, authentication. Avoid rolling your own. Avoid rolling your own. Avoid rolling your own. You'll do it wrong. Or you'll usually do it wrong. The risk of doing it wrong is kind of bad. So
I believe Jeremy has said that before, once or twice.
Don't roll your own unless you know what you're doing. So basically, if you have a good proven library or something to do your auth, good. If your framework provide ones, use it. Whatever, because it's easy to make mistakes here. Your passwords should be hashed. Basically, the gist of this: if you can send your users their passwords back, you're doing it wrong. They should be one-way hashes in case your database gets stolen. Because the thing is, users are going to reuse passwords, or a good chunk of users are going to reuse your passwords. You don't want to screw them over because your database got stolen. So basically, again, if you're not familiar with how this works, the proper way to handle passwords is that when they set their password, and yes, your user should be setting your password, it goes to your database and it goes through a one-way hash, be it bcrypt, PKBF, PBKBF, I don't always remember that acronym, or some good hash. Don't use MD5, it sucks. Use a good hashing algorithm that goes one way, and it can't go back without a ridiculous amount of computing power. And then when it checks the password, you don't actually know what's in there. You just take whatever they put in, pass it through the hash again with the salt and whatever, and see if the nonsense matches the nonsense in your database. And that's how you log in. So, and by the way, again, this sort of extends to use, like, if you know of a site that sends you back your password for some reason, you know they're not doing it right. In that case, use a different password for that site. Something you know. And sensitive credentials and settings. So this is another thing. You want by this I kind of mean things like database credentials, API credentials, anything that your site uses to access other things, or to authenticate into other stuff like your database. The database is sort of a classic example of this. You don't want that to live anywhere but your production server. Your production server should have its own database credentials, and they should never exit that server. You should put them into a separate setting file that's separate from source control, or you want them in environment variables. Don't check it into source control, because you don't want to compromise your source control, meaning that your production site is compromised. So there are several ways to do this. What I like to do is, like, again, this isn't the only way to do this, but just as an example, where can I find it here? I have, for one of my products, I have my settings file. I have, like, all the non-sensitive settings and things like that, just straight up, and this goes into source control, and I have, like, a little import that imports from a separate file that I call local settings or something, and that doesn't live in source control. That lives on my server only, so I stick that in there when I deploy the site. And so those credentials, like the database username, password, and everything else, that never leaves that server. You can also put it in environment variables and things like that. And I think we went over validation. validate on your server side. Don't trust your front end. Make sure emails are emails, strings are strings, integers are integers, dates are dates, things like that. Make sure what you're getting is what you expect to get, essentially, because your front end might be broken by the user if they're being jerks. And this is more infrastructure stuff than coding stuff. Web server. Make sure you know what you're serving. This is more of a web server configuration thing. So if you're going to use a web server like Apache, IIS, Nginx, make sure you know how it works and how it serves. And don't just copy the files, because this can be a thing. Make sure you know how your config works, and make sure you know what files are actually being served. So there is this thing that tends to happen with Apache where, well, that used to happen. It doesn't happen as much anymore. But Apache used to have a document root in www/ or var/www. And by default, it would serve everything out of that directory. And so what would happen is people would put their sites in that directory, even the server-side stuff, and then set up everything else to serve the site properly. But all the files in there end up getting served, including their settings and configurations. And yeah, bad stuff happens. Now, more recently, Apache is a lot of Apache installations for a lot of Linux distros have moved the document root from var/www to var/www/http for this reason, because people kept accidentally doing this. So again, make sure you know how your files are being served. If you have statics, they should be served set up your statics, and if you're using whatever framework, make sure you know how to set that up properly. So that only the stuff you intend to serve is being served. And
it's also a good idea not to use the common place just in case people hack it. Because you expect on different servers to have the website to be in a certain place. And if you put it in different places, it takes one of the guesses away. It's kind of like changing the root from something like administrator to something else that you made up.
yeah,
Put it in a different
like
place,
basically
makes it a little bit hard.
make sure you're not accidentally setting your stuff up. That's basically the point of that, which can be easy to do sometimes. And TLS, SSL, have it. Especially if you're doing, like, the only pages that don't need SSL or don't need a certificate are static pages that only serve content and don't take any information. You don't have an excuse anymore because Let's Encrypt is out of beta. This is sort of a sidetrack. I'll show you this. So they just left beta, and it is you can get SSL certificates for free, and they have a little application an open source application, so you can review the code of what it does. That basically you install on your server and run it, and then it automatically verifies your server and gets your certificate for you. Yay! So great. So now you don't have an excuse to not have SSL. So yay. So that came out recently, and that's good. But basically, you're going to want it, especially if you do any authentication. If you have users log in, you need it, because otherwise the security of that login is useless. So yeah, not much of an excuse. Make sure that your users' data is protected going back and forth. Make sure your users are getting what they expect to get. It's good to do. And even if you have static pages, if you protect because I see this sometimes where some sites only protect their login page and their stuff with SSL. I don't feel that's a good idea, because there is such a thing as redirecting users to places they shouldn't. If your whole site is SSL and it's all HTTPS, then you've established expectation, and so if they don't have that, something's up. I mean, again, no reason not to do it now.
Basically, if you're going to use SSO, you better use it on your entire site, not just your login.
Well, if you're only having one web server, you set it up on the web server. So if you do it, your whole site's going to have it by default. The only time you got to worry about is if you have different servers doing different things.
That's it.
And this is another big thing. Check your ports. So, yeah, check your ports. Basically,
Disable all but about 4.
So, I mean, a web server should have maybe like, if it's a remote, like you're going to have port 80 for HTTP, port 443 for HTTPS. If it's all, it's only be like disable port 80.
Maybe 8080.
And maybe if it's remote, you might have 22 for
33.
SSH.
What's the one for remote desktop? Is
Yeah.
33.
If it's Windows, you might have an SMB for your remote desktop needs. But make sure you know what they all do. You don't want ports that are open that you don't know what the hell they do. That's not a sign of good things. I mean, use a firewall if it makes things easier, so that you can manage what's available in one place. You might not need one, but if it makes it easier, go ahead and scan them if you need to. Knowing how to use Nmap is handy. Scan your own stuff. Make sure the ports that you expect to be open are open, and what you expect to not be open or not.
Yeah, I actually scan my home network every couple of weeks.
On the site?
Do I?
Should we scan somebody's site?
No, I scan mine every couple of weeks just to make sure that it.
You probably don't need to do that. Just make sure your
I do. I'm excited.
I believe you. You know, it's like you got time on your hand.
Yeah. So
I have actually found a couple of ports open and gone, what the?
Yep.
See, there's all this stuff that you're supposed to do. I got burnt recently with my mail server, which I don't pay attention to, like all of these old email addresses that nobody's using them, but they fill up, and they were taking away almost all of my file system. So the thing has slowed down to a crawl. But I used to go in and check them every day or every other day and that kind of stuff. It just gets to be, you know, you have stuff to do, and you forget.
That's when you automate.
Usually when I put that outlet, the little clicky thing that I had last week, I did a port scan just to make sure that it didn't do something funky.
I used to run top every day.
Yeah. Just to make sure it doesn't do something funky.
Basically, make sure your config is working. Make sure it's doing what you think it's doing. Because like some people, they have their servers with their naked FTP port that is still has guest access or something. Let's see what's in here.
Anonymous.
Or they have some weak password. What's really fun, like the email servers with POP3 ports that don't. Then you can prove ports.
Back in the day, one of the FTP servers that I installed with the anonymous user enabled. I was like, really? That's crazy.
Yeah,
why would you do that?
A lot of people used to do that. That was actually very common because nobody, and this may be wrong, but nobody expected, in the good days of hackers that you were going to just go in there and corrupt somebody's stuff.
Just do bad things.
Yeah, that just wasn't done.
And,
We're all good guys.
Permissions, yay. Know how your permissions work, because oh my gosh, a lot of people set up Linux web servers and don't know how Linux permissions work. Please know how permissions work.
Change mode 777.
Everything. Why is everything
It will work.
It will work.
So make sure you know what user your web server is using, and make sure it only has the permission it needs. Obviously, for example, your web server does not need to be able to write to your code. Your web server only needs to write to wherever the uploads are going or whatever. And I mean, it's a common sense thing. Just restrict your web server to only doing the things it should be doing. That way, if someone screws with your web server, they don't have permission to wreak havoc on your server. And again, treat user files with suspicion. Don't let user files execute out of whatever directory you're storing them in. And as far as anything else goes, dependencies. Yay! We just talked a little about this. I guess this is sort of a general programming thing. If you have libraries that are dependent stuff, keep offline backups of them if they're important. Because you might not, when you do your deploys, you might have web access to re-download them all over again. They might go offline, things like that. Document your dependencies, have a good list so you know everything you need to deploy your site. Know when to refactor replace. If one of your dependencies is not being maintained anymore, might be high time to replace it and recode your application a little bit. And keep offline backups. So yeah, do that. Especially if you're doing, if you're doing Node, you're going to have a lot of dependencies. Because again, that's just the way it works. Some environments just have a lot of dependencies. They have good ways of managing them, just do it. Otherwise it causes pain. And again, user data, keep it separate from code whenever possible. And do not dev with production data. That probably sounds weird, but you don't want to be going around with your laptop with a copy of your site's database. Your laptop might get stolen. I've had like one case where it's like there was a really old legacy site, and this was especially bad, and unfortunately I wasn't informed of this, that there was a legacy site that was from way back in the day, and in the database it stored users' social security numbers in plain text. And one of the guys went out the door with a laptop with a copy of that database for the purpose of dev.
Very bad.
Bad. Don't. That's why you don't do it. Anyway, that's kind of it. Anything you want to flesh out on, or anything you want to ask on, like, hey, how do I do this? I hear since he still needs to come back to do his thing.
Right.
So, questions, topics.
So how many websites do you do, and you apply all of this effort and thinking and
All of them.
protection? God.
Jeremy's a professional.
Oh my God.
I would be very insecure in that environment. That'd be
How's
crazy.
that? It kind of
And that's the thing.
depends on what has happened to you and what is the value of the stuff. Like the websites I do most of the times, people want to store
I will
files.
say that none of these are particularly difficult. Like, in an individual basis, it's sort of like a very simple thing to do. But again, you have to remember to do it. So I build myself like nice little checklists. Like, okay, before I deploy a site, have I done that? Have I done that? Have I done that? And that's how you take care of it.
I suppose
you kind of build on
in
it.
today's world, it's not difficult to do a lot of that stuff.
No,
But early,
Well, even
it
there are a lot
was
of
a lot
things.
harder to do.
There are a
some
lot
of
of things
this.
that are not difficult to do. As he says, you need to think about it, and then you need to spend some time to do it.
Yeah.
Because no matter
And that,
how
and
you
that
look at
kinda
it.
goes back to probably some point I should have put on here is that if you're not sure what you're doing, you use a ready-made web framework.
Yeah. And that's what I do.
Because that'll often because a mature web framework will take care of a lot of these things by default. Like if you use Rails or .NET MVC or Django or Laravel if you do PHP. By the way, don't hate on PHP too much. Modern PHP is a lot better than old PHP, thank goodness. But if you use Laravel or anything like that, they're going to have tools to do these things, a lot of these things, because they've already gone through the due diligence of, hey, this is a problem, we need a way to solve this.
A lot of them are done automatically. Like they have authentication options and stuff like that.
If you're doing
You use it the way they tell you how to use it.
if you're doing something that's a little more piecemeal, like if you're using a very minimalist framework like Flask, or if it's just a straight up server side thing to run code. Like if you're doing Node, especially if you're doing something like Node, get yourself a set of libraries to do a lot of these things. Like a lot of Node projects, because it's sort of something you piece together yourself, are going to have a lot of dependencies.
Yeah.
So yeah, document your dependencies.
Node,
Again, that goes
Node
back
is
to
not
document.
ready for prime time.
Well, it is ready. It's just, it's sort of the practice. Like there are advantages and disadvantages of doing things that way. Like on one hand, you got to piece together a lot of separate libraries to do separate things to assemble a solution for yourself. On the other hand, that gives you a lot of flexibility to do what you want. Like there is downsides to using like mature, big, monolithic frameworks like Rails and such. And it's that you're locked into doing things a certain way, which might not fit what you're doing, and then you have to work around your framework in order to do certain things. I mean, that happens. I mean, there's sort of, again, pros and cons to everything, but again, like, have some way to take care of it. There's a lot of ways to basically do a lot of these things. And oftentimes you forget that they're a thing because your environment does it for you.
I want to get done.
Anyway, so, I mean, I guess, anything else?
The encrypt thing you said was a good thing, because I didn't know that was.
Yeah, so yeah, this is recently a thing, so yay, it's easy to get certificates now.
It's a good deal.
So to get
Really nice get deal. Certificates and not pay $130.
Because I mean, like, really, most of your sites aren't going to need like extended verification certificate. Yeah. It's just that make sure that the user knows they're going to your site. That's not a very.
I used to get these things for sites that were handling money or something like that. Yeah. And it cost $30.
Yeah,
it's been a long time since I saw $30.
Like if you handle financial information or you're a bank or something, then you gotta pony up for some pretty expensive.
You're gonna pay more than $100.
I had trouble at the hospital the other day. You get
anyway. I'm pretty much done. So
okay.
There we go.
There's like 10 minutes left.
That's good. That's cool.
Yeah.
I can go fast.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I need to cast.
I gotta stop the cast now.
Stop the cast. Click on the little blue thing there, the little casting thing, or do that.
Okay.
Makes it stop.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of ate a lot of time with that. That was longer than I expected. But yeah.
That's okay. I did this stuff today. I won't say.
I don't think you did the whole screen. I think you just did the.
It's the pull down on the right hand side when you do cast.
All right, so
stop casting. Click on stop.
Stop. Oh, I didn't do the.
You did, yeah.
I thought I had already done that.
Well,
so
it
pull down on the right hand side.
The little thing there.
Yeah.
Go to full screen. Click on the cast.
Yes.
Click on that. 2 minutes clicking. There's too much clicking when you want to do full screen.
All right. So.
So now you're set, or you should be set.
All right. This is kind of some high-level stuff. So, what is that looking at?
Your screen.
Okay.
Your laptop.
Okay.
So it can maybe actually see.
So I'm going to speak on how things were done, how things are done now, basically from a technology point of view. Responsive web, a few demos. We won't have a lot of time for question and answers, but we already talked about a lot of stuff. So in the old days, some will remember Mosaic, Netscape, and NetExplorer, doing everything with HTML tags. This was actually aimed at a little bit of where Ray was, because I think his site was created exactly this way.
Yes, yes.
And you had text editors, graphics were absolutely lousy, and the connections were slow. If you went back to the bulletin boards, they were even slower. And now we have a multitude of development tools, and what I count on with anything that I do is I like drag and drop. I will use Notepad but sparingly. Most of what I do, I just want to use the tool exactly where it is. And it's mainly the time frame. A lot of stuff that I have done and that I do are like prototypes. So it's not going to have, 10,000 users, or it's going to be for someone that they're using it for a club, or I used to do these ticket websites and things like that. But now you have really good graphics, and one of the major things that's happened is your site should handle any size screen from a watch. A watch may be a little harder to HD TV. And websites have thousands of pages, so you need to be able to make changes across the board and not have to go in with a HTML editor and make all of the changes. Search is another thing that's been added, as well as streaming video. I don't know if I want to show this thing yet. All right, I'm going to show it now because we don't have a lot of time.
It's
All right.
wrap-up time. It's pack-up time.
Okay.
We should be packing up
All right.
now.
Probably just do this.
Yeah.
Do it what?
Next session, I guess.
Yeah, I actually can do it next session.
Yeah.
Let's
Let's do it next section.
All right.
This is really when we tell you to pack up.
Yeah.
Pack up.
All right, so I'll just start from scratch.
Yeah, Jeremy went wild.
This is,
Jeremy went crazy.
this is one of those things that the .NET framework will do for you.
Yeah.
It'll do a lot of stuff for you.
Yeah. All right, so just click on Stopcast and there.
Yeah, I might shove that. I'm gonna shove that file up to the.
Yeah.
It's a good